conversations that will help you keep the faith. Everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. 1 John 5 and 4. And now, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, without further ado, it is time for Matters of Faith, the radio show. It's Monday, June 19th. It's Liberation Day, and it's 8 o'clock, time for Matters of Faith, the radio show. I'm your host, the Reverend Dr. J. Lauren Russell, and my very special guest tonight, Reverend Frank I. Williams. And we're talking about the topic and the article, A Father's Wise Counsel. We can be seen live on Matters of Faith as well as the J. Lauren Russell Facebook group. So telephone and tell a friend. You don't want to miss this show tonight, A Father's Wise Counsel, with our very special guest, Reverend Frank I. Williams. Don't forget to support our advertisers and our sponsors, the JLR Company and J. Lauren Russell Consulting, LLC, for all of your church financial consulting needs. Check out our website, www.jlaurenrussellconsulting.com. That's www.jlaurenrussellconsulting.com. Or simply give us a call, 718-328-8096, 718-328-8096. If you want to train your trustees, if you want to develop your property, if you need a church loan, give us a call. We'll be there to help. Matters of Faith, the book, can be purchased at my Cash App, $Matters of Faith. The cost of the book is $22.80. That's $22.80. You can send your check or money order to the JLR Company, Post Office Box 301, New York, New York 10035. That's Post Office Box 301, New York, New York 10035. Get the book. It will absolutely bless your life. You can also get it as an ebook. All you need to do is go to www.smashwords.com/books/view/993177. That's www.smashwords.com/books/view/993177. The book has no shipping and handling if you get it as an ebook. And also check out the Eat Okra app for all black-owned restaurants all over the nation. That's right, Eat Okra. And finally, subscribe, like, and share our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and share our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. And I have one more thing. Make sure that you subscribe to Better Mag Magazine, www.abettermag.com. That's www.abettermag.com. It's a 2-year subscription. It's only $27 and change. So please subscribe to Better Mag Magazine. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The nation was approaching its 3rd year of a bloody civil war, and the proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforth shall be free. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in the rebellious states. However, the news did not arrive in Texas until June 19, 1865, 2.5 years later. That's when the slaves in Texas realized that they had been free for 2.5 years. We now celebrate Juneteenth as a national holiday, a Freedom Day. And I join you in celebrating with us as we look back over our years and look forward to our future. Blessed and happy National Freedom Day, Juneteenth. I'd like to make you aware of, and then extend an invitation to you, to join me in a significant event that will take place in my life on Wednesday, July 12, 2023, at which time I will be installed as the District Governor for Rotary International, District 7230. The event will take place at the Pelham Bay Split Rock Golf Course, 870 Shore Road in the Bronx. The event goes from 6 to 9 p.m. The ticket price is $125. However, if you purchase 2, it's $200. You can use the QR code on your screen, or you can use the link at www.rotary7230.org. That's www.rotary7230.org. I thank you for all the prayers that you've always offered to me the support that you've given me, and I'm hoping that you can be there to support me as I take on this new responsibility. It is monumental, it is historical, and I'd love you to be a part of it. Wednesday, July 12th, 2023, Pelham Bay Split Rock Golf Course from 6 to 9 p.m. I will be installed as the District Governor for District 7230 of Rotary International. And now the article, A Father's Wise Counsel. That article can be found in my column, Matters of Faith, at The Bronx Chronicle, www.thebronxchronicle.com, as well as the Yonkers Insider, www.yonkersinsider.blogspot.com. You can also find it in Better Mag Magazine, Black Westchester Magazine, and Pamela's Big Heart newsletter, A Father's Wise Counsel. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1, New King James Version. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. A father's wise counsel. Many people mistake a proverb for a promise. A proverb is defined as a saying that expresses a perceived truth that is based on common sense or experience. A proverb is not a promise as some contend. Some read the book of Proverbs and attach promises to them as if following the truth of common sense or experience will result in the supposed promise becoming a reality. The reality is this: a proverb is not a promise. When Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, he provided instruction particularly to his sons. Sometimes the conveyance of a proverb comes in the form of commands, and many of the proverbs Solomon shared were expressed in contrast. The text for this article uses that approach. A wise son making a glad father, but a foolish son bringing grief to his mother. Using the preposition or conjunction but shows the differences between a wise and a foolish son. Both receive wise counsel from their father. One uses it intelligently, the other thoughtlessly. In my own life experience, I had a father who imparted wise counsel to all three of his sons and his one daughter. To be completely transparent, none of us consistently took his sage counsel wisely. In fact, we were all guilty of foolishly squandering it. As we aged, if I can use the but conjunction here, I can safely say that each of us eventually did not bring grief to our mother, but gladness to our father. In other words, it took time for the wise and constructive counsel of our father to sink into the heads of his children. On this Father's Day and the eve of Juneteenth, the real day of liberation for enslaved Africans in America, I want to encourage the men, fathers, uncles, and father figures in our society to remain faithful, sharing wise counsel with their children and anyone who enters your circle of influence. Many former slaves shared wise counsel with their children, counsel that encouraged steadfastness in their quest for freedom. Many never saw that freedom, but their descendants have. Proverbs may not be promises, but if we share their wise counsel wide and far enough, their perceived truth and common sense approach to everyday circumstances just might change the trajectory of many wayward sons and daughters. Happy Father's and Liberation Day. Here's my question for you tonight. In what ways are you putting the wise counsel of a father to the best possible use? Let me ask that question again. In what ways are you putting the wise counsel of a father to the best possible use? Reverend Frank I. Williams was born on the island nation of St. Kitts and Nevis, West Indies. He migrated to the Bronx, New York in the early 1980s. He became a member of the Bronx Baptist Church in 1993, and he and his wife Tisha met at church and at God's appointed time fell in love and married in 2006. They have 4 wonderful children: Timothy, Tiffany, Trinity, and Thomas. He's a graduate of New York Theological Seminary with a Master's of Divinity degree and was ordained to the Christian ministry in 2002 under the auspices of the late Reverend Dr. Samuel G. Sampson. Guided under the leadership and mentorship of Dr. Sampson for 22 years, Frank now serves as a senior pastor of the Wake Eden Community Baptist Church and the Bronx Baptist Church, both founded by Dr. Simpson and both located in the Bronx. Frank has served on his denomination's Committee on Nominations, Committee on Committees, and the African American Advisory Council. He is the immediate past president of the National African American Fellowship and a trustee for the North American Mission Board. So, Matters of Faith family, would you welcome with me tonight on our Liberation Monday, Juneteenth, my friend, my colleague, my associate, and this dynamic minister of the gospel, Reverend Frank I. Williams. All right, did I get all of that right? Did I get it right? Did I get you in there all purposefully and stuff like that?
Yes,
Let me stop my share. Let me stop my share.
Yes, you did.
Welcome you to the Matters of Faith program tonight. Hey, listen, man, I wanted to do this. Let me do this, opening up our conversation. I read your bio, so they know a little bit about you. They don't know a lot, but they know a little bit about you. But tell us something about you that we don't know and we really should know.
Oh, wow. Let's see. I spent, since I moved here in 1980, I spent all my childhood years since then and my adult life in New York State, between New York City and a little upstate New York. So I'm really integrated into being a New Yorker. I've experienced my conversion to faith from a kid in New York City who was going in the wrong direction at times, to coming full circle back to the faith of my mother and my grandmother, and really seeing a vision that God gave my mother before I was even born, to that becoming the reality of my life as I serve today as a minister of the gospel. So this journey of faith for me was one that my mother made a deal with God over before I was even born. So this journey is larger than me, I think.
Well, I like that. That's I really like that a lot. Actually, when you were speaking, I was reminded of Lois in the book of book of Timothy.
Lois and Eunice.
Yep.
Yeah, that mirrors my story, at least with the mother and the grandmother, feeding their faith into their son and grandson Timothy. That's for me, it was Elizabeth and Sophia.
All right, Elizabeth and Sophia. Elizabeth is your mom, right?
My grandmother's Elizabeth. She's in heaven now. 104 years, 104 and a half years of life God gave her, and then she slipped away and went to glory. My mom is still with me and with us, and she's Sophia.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I haven't. Have I met your mother?
Oh yeah, you certainly have.
Okay.
You certainly have. You've seen her. You've been in the same spaces with her. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I have to make sure I take note of that the next time we cross paths, so I don't miss it again.
Absolutely, brother.
Yep. So welcome to Matters of Faith. I'm so glad to see you here tonight.
I'm glad to be here with you, man.
And it's a small world, as you already know. I just want to say this before we get into what we're going to talk about. But I did an installation service for one of the other things I'm involved with, which is the Rotary. And I did an installation for in New Rochelle for the incoming cabinet, their president, and stuff like that. And they also gave away scholarships.
Yeah.
One of the persons they gave a scholarship to was a young man. Actually, his dad recognized me and asked me, did I do ministry in other churches in New York? And I said, yeah, I do all the time. So he said, what about Wake Eden? I said, Wake Eden? I said, that's my other church. He said, I thought I knew you. And then his son recognized me also. But the last time I saw his son, I mean, his son's like 6'6".
Yeah, his son was not that tall the last time you saw him.
No, he was a little guy. He was like not looking me in my eyes. Now I'm looking up to him. So it was amazing that you know, this walk of life that we enter into, we might see people anywhere and everywhere that have benefited from the counsel that the Lord has shared with us, that we now share with them. Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. In fact, his father and that same young man, his son, who received the scholarship, they were in church this past Sunday. And so I had a good chat with both of them and congratulated him for his for receiving that scholarship from the Rotary Club.
Ah,
Yeah. So we had a good laugh about that.
yeah, and you know, I think what they're trying to do at that Rotary Club is they're doing consecutive scholarships. I think that's what they're doing. So instead of just giving them 1 year, they're going to give it to them periodically
Oh,
every year
really?
to
That's
help
really
them
a
out.
great idea.
Yeah, that is a great idea because you know you get it once and then it's gone, and you kind of struggle all over again. So there a lot of scholarships are now looking at doing it on a continuing basis so that the student actually gets something every single semester or every year to help them out.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good, brother.
Yeah. So, so hey man, welcome. Listen, and today is just I think you know, when I thought about you coming on and the Lord inspired me to talk about a father's wise counsel, you know, it's interesting because technically, and you just shared that with us, that your growing up came through Elizabeth and Sophia,
Yes.
right? But there was some wise counsel that came in there, and I said, Father's Day, so happy Father's Day, by the way, because you're definitely a father, definitely that, and it's Juneteenth, so happy Liberation Day.
I appreciate that. Same to you, brother, and to all of our Black brothers and sisters out there. We're grateful to God for this day of liberation, indeed.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you know, because your background is diverse and you've done a number of things. In fact, you are the immediate past president of the African American Fellowship for the Southern Baptist Convention. So there is a following there that maybe you should speak to. Give us an understanding of what that is and what they do through that branch of Zion coming out of the Southern Baptist Convention. I think that might be something interesting. People might want to know about that or some aspects of it.
Sure. The National African American Fellowship was founded in 1993 by a group of pastors within the Southern Baptist Convention, African American pastors within this convention of churches. And it was founded primarily as a fellowship to bring them together of who shared a similar journey of faith and a similar journey of injustice in this country, but also within a convention whose origins were founded on the injustice of the enslavement of Black people. And they came together in 1993 really around three central purposes. One, fellowship. Two, to be an emergent voice within this convention of churches that would speak to issues of concerns or perspectives that would communicate to the larger convention the viewpoint of the African American community. And of course, to encourage one another in the work of the church, in the area of accomplishing the Great Commission, evangelism and church planting, and those other ministerial objectives. So, and it has served well over the last 3 decades in those areas. And so we continue that legacy of work from those founding pastors until today. And I had the privilege of serving 2 years in the role of the president for the fellowship.
Now, speaking of that, that's a point. Now, your mentor, your pastor, Reverend Samuel G. Simpson, had been integrally involved in the very beginning of all of that. And you'd mentioned church planting and evangelism and mobilization of missionaries, which you didn't mention, but I'll just throw that one in there because that was also another area of concern. But Dr. Simpson got the message, and he did what he was asked to do. That is to say, what he was called to do by God, not what he was asked to do by the Southern Baptist Convention, but what he was asked to do by God, and actually became a prolific church planter in his own right.
Yes, he did.
And because of that, I mean, you are who you are because you sort of sat at the feet of this great man for a number of years, learning and gleaning and just hearing the wisdom that he had to share. But talk about how he mentored you and guided you in this whole idea of church planting and then church growth and development and the spreading of the gospel using various tools, because you use various tools to do that.
Right. Well, thank you for that question. Dr. Simpson was a mentor who I would say mirrored much of or modeled much of Jesus's approach to mentoring his disciples. Dr. Simpson was big on you paying attention. All right. So if you were involved with him at any point, he did not always give you a heads up when he had an assignment for you.
Mm.
So you were required to really pay close attention to how he modeled ministry. And we did see that in Jesus. He would go into villages and towns and he would demonstrate, and he would teach, he would pray, he would heal. And then, in the next chapter or two, you would see that he's sending out the 12 by themselves to do the same. Their preparation work was watching him and listening to him and learning from what he said, and then he would send them out. Dr. Simpson mentored me in much of a similar way. It was really taking me along. I would tag along at different meetings, whether it was an organization that dealt with housing or one that dealt with health disparities in the community, or a community clergy precinct liaison type meeting. And I would tag along. I would be there behind the scenes, just kind of watching and listening and learning quietly. And then there were times where he will send me to one of those meetings by myself, and I'll come back with a report. Or at one of those meetings, he may prompt someone to ask me to pray. Same thing, I will go to denominational meeting, annual convention meetings, and just tag along with him. And by then I knew enough to pay attention and to take my own notes without him asking me to do that. Because I know at some point he's going to say something or require for me to do something for which I had not sufficient, or what some would consider sufficient notice. But with Dr. Simpson, sufficient notice is the moment he told you.
So be ye also ready.
Yeah. Be ready. Absolutely.
Always.
So that was his approach.
And that's interesting because of that. I mean, Dr. Simpson, I know, I've known Pastor Simpson for not as long as you have sat on this. Well, actually, I think I have, because I think I met Dr. Simpson in the 80s.
Oh, well then, yeah.
Yeah, I know I met him in the 80s because I sat on the board of directors and he was integrally involved in that organization. So I've known him since then. And one of the things I've noted about him is that he was prolific and certainly headstrong about reaching the community in various areas. So he was one of the first persons that I met who was in ministry, who was involved unilaterally in things like precinct council work, and things like, the clergy liaisons with the New York City Police Department, holding them accountable at the level of engagement. The idea of creating a ministers or clergy council to deal with the police department outside of being a clergy liaison, outside of being in the precinct council, but just doing that because the clergy needed to be involved. And he was always interested and always engaged in putting ministers, those people who were in his circle of influence, into those mixes so that they would have an ear in the people's, for the people's voices, and they could pastor them because they knew what they were going through.
Yes, absolutely. In essence, I see Dr. Simpson and men like Dr. Simpson as shepherds of the community. Weren't just pastors of their congregation. They were shepherds of the community. And so in essence, the entire community was their quote unquote congregation of sorts, because their love and their mission and vision extended into those spaces beyond the four walls of the building where the church gathers. And so I gleaned that sense of ministry as well through those years of working directly with Dr. Simpson. And so, for me, it was second nature uh, to see ministry as dealing with affordable housing,
Right.
health disparities in the Bronx, church, community, and police relationships. Um, you know, um, um, even to the point of dealing with childcare and early childhood education, and being a resource and a source for families who were looking to um, things like stem the dropout rates among Black and Brown children within the Bronx, especially in those early decades of the ministry, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, et cetera. And still we have concerns about education and disparities there. But so all of these areas were a part of what it meant to be a church in the community. It wasn't just Bible study on Wednesday and preaching on Sunday and we come for worship. No, the life of the church was every single day in the community, doing something that helped to elevate the people of the community and help to inform their lives, both spiritually and also economically and all the other practical areas of their lives. I mean, both churches have had, like many other churches in New York City, have had food pantry, food distribution, and you name it. We've likely been a part of that or have some ministry that addresses, those areas.
Now, what's interesting to me is that a lot of the churches, and I'm certainly not pointing a finger at anybody, but a lot of the churches in our communities in particular are not necessarily involved in all of those things. They tend to be, sort of, what should I say, worship center centered.
Mm,
It's what goes on in the worship center. It is prayer
right.
and worship, and and we hear a lot of talk about worship and praise and worship and praise, and I get that, but there's not a lot of outreach and upreach.
Yeah, when I look at the gospel of Jesus Christ, I see Jesus in the synagogues on Sabbath day, but I also see him in the streets having conversations with men and women. I also see him performing miracles that were related to uh,
Mm.
feeding people who were hungry and in need of food. I also see him healing bodies, dealing with health disparities, people who couldn't afford healthcare or couldn't afford medical services during his time in history that he was on earth. And so when I look at the ministry of Jesus, I see all of these elements at work in the Gospels. I also see Jesus dealing with a religious community that had become so
Mm.
isolated from
Mm.
the community that they had become this sort of elite spiritual group that were highly respected among themselves, but so disconnected from the people and also, unfortunately, disconnected from God, that they functioned for the purposes of facilitating what they felt was beneficial to them and their own power and their own sense of authority within that community. And now, I'm not suggesting that those churches who are not involved beyond worship today are within that same category. All I'm simply saying is when I look in the gospel, I see Jesus in all of these areas. He's even at parties, he's even at funerals, he's at weddings, and he's engaged in the public life of real people. And so and so my ministry experience mirrors that. You are involved in the real life, in the public life, in the social life of the community, and even in the political life of the community. And we saw Jesus engaged with, although it may have been antagonistic at times, engaged with the political life of the world in which he was born. And so I again see that this is the norm for ministry for me. Other ministers, other ministries may not have had such experiences, or may not read the gospel in the same way, or lift those elements from the gospel in the same way that I have seen done and that I continue to do today. So it's for me, it's a natural part of the journey.
Well, I'm glad that you shared that, because it for me it's a natural part of the journey as well. I think that for those of us who are not involved in community, and even going back a number of years, I think it was what's his name, this great theologian, turn of the century guy. I have his book right in front of me. I can't see it by the top of my head, but he said that ministry is having a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other.
Oh, I remember that quote. I can't recall
Yeah,
the
yeah.
name, but I know what you're
It'll
talking
hit me in a
about.
moment. Matter of fact, my eyes will cross his book in just a moment. But yeah, that's important, because if you don't know what's going on in the community, then you really can't serve the community. You can preach to them, but you can't engage with them.
Yeah, and those are two different worlds.
Yeah,
And those are
yeah,
two different worlds.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And so when you think about a father's wise counsel, I think in my estimation, I think I wrote about that, talking about you know, my dad giving his children wise counsel, but we not always taking it.
Right.
In fact, we kind of squandered it quite a bit. And then of course, when he was no longer there, then the question becomes, well, who's going to give you the counsel? And no one was there to do that. And so now the only thing that you have to lean on is what you heard. And so if you heard good things and if you planted good seeds, then the seeds will begin to sprout and they'll begin to grow. And my dad planted some great seeds, man. I'm just appreciative that I had a father who literally took the time to teach
Wow.
and
That's
to and,
that's
and
that's
to show
impressive.
and to live by example. That's really probably the biggest part.
Wow, that's a blessing to hear that. I was preaching. I preached a sermon yesterday at both congregations, um, and I shared with them, as I have in the past on occasion, that I did not have the privilege you had of growing up with my father active in my life, right?
Mhm.
So both my childhood, teenage years, and even the majority of my young adult years, there was just a sliver, a window where my father was actively a part of my life as an adult.
Mm.
And, so I didn't have that example of a father figure growing up in the home. I certainly had my uncles who were around me and actively in my life, and so they were men, present, from whom I could glean, but not my dad, my father. So that really is a privilege to see that, and it wasn't until I think it was my early 20s where I became
Mm.
cognizant of the absence and the impact of the absence of my father in my life. And that actually happened in a Sunday school class.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
How so?
Yeah, I figured you would ask that question.
Of course.
I'll tell you, church is so transformational. Let me just put this in right now. Church is such a transformational space. The gathering of people for worship and for fellowship is is vital, especially within the Black community, right? This has been our solace. This has been our place of hope and organizing and liberation before we were liberated, and the places where the formation of new identities took place in this, in this hemisphere of the world. And I just want to encourage people to to recapture, whether the pandemic shifted you from regular church engagement, or whether it was something that's happened for a while, or whether it's that there's too many, just too many issues with churches and scandals and so forth that have just sort of disenchanted you with church. I just want to encourage you to still find a good place of worship, a place where you can settle in, and you can bring your children there, and you can determine within sufficient time that it's a safe space for you to develop. No church is ever going to be perfect, but I'm just saying to us that I have recognized that the church is a vital part of our development as a people, has been historically, and I believe and I contend that it still is for us today and ought to be. Having said all of that, to get back to your question directly, it was a Sunday school class. I went to church one Sunday morning, and I remember my Sunday school teacher, a very creative woman. She's now with the Lord, Mrs. White, Sister White, and this was our Sunday school lesson that morning. She had a bunch of magazines on the desk, on the table where we all gathered. Essence, Ebony, you name it. If it was a magazine that featured people of color, or that dealt with Black issues or Black perspective, she had the magazine there, multiple of them. And she told all the students to just take up a magazine. So I grabbed one. I think it was either Essence or Ebony. And she said, flip through the magazine and stop when you find something that captures your attention or that moves you in some way. And so we all there flipping through, and I flipped through, and I kept flipping through. And my brother, I tell you, I flipped to a page, the Black man, strong looking Black man holding a baby. I'm sure you've seen that. Many photos depict that.
Yes,
that strong Black man holding a baby like a responsible father. And my heart just was captivated. And man, if I'm honest with you, man, my eyes started welling up. I had to actually push away from the table so that people won't see what was going on. And it was in that moment, I was ambushed. Wow. I was ambushed, man, in that classroom by my own feelings. And I had no idea what I was dealing with in that moment, except I saw a Black man holding a baby. And I just felt, wow, look at the love. And all of a sudden I felt this weird sensation through my body, man, like, that kind of thing. Yeah, man. So that was my moment.
Wow.
In my early 20s. Wow. And in a Sunday school class, fathers, our children need us. Our children need the love and the attention. And if we are around and we are able to have engagement with our children, or even if, sometimes you can be in the same house and still be absent.
Yep, no doubt about it.
Our children need our love and our attention. That was my moment. That was my moment where I came to such a realization.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story, actually, because a lot of people wouldn't share it, A. B, a lot of people don't recognize it as being a moment in their life. And C, a lot of people never had that moment in their life. But they came face to face with the fact that there was something missing, and they saw it. Now, I say that because as you were speaking, I thought about your family, and I thought about you as a dad, and I thought about being there. I've known you for a long time now, since the time you had your first child.
Yes, you did.
And I recall very vividly the affection that you always showed to your children. Your son, then your daughters, and now you got a second son. So now there's 2 sons and 2 daughters. But I've always admired the way you love on them, and the way you guide them as their dad, and the way you really got on my case because I taught your son how to do something that you didn't like.
Yes, you did. As soon as you started talking, I remember that moment.
But I remember the children. I love them because I know them, except Robert. I haven't met Robert yet, right? I haven't met him.
I don't know Robert either. I haven't met him either.
What's the baby's name?
Thomas, man. All my children.
Thomas. All T's. All T's. That's right. All T's.
We got Robert.
All T's. And I shouldn't forget that because my dad's name is Thomas. How can I forget that?
I don't know,
man. So yeah, but Thomas is the one. So I haven't met Thomas yet. So I'm looking forward to meeting Thomas. But yeah, but I watched the way in which you really work with your children. And I've had a unique opportunity because I've had the pleasure of actually working with them and teaching them in their school classes, because you
Yes, you
brought
have.
me to do some stuff like with them
Right.
there. And speaking of which leads us to back to a direction that you started in terms of being involved in the community and making a difference in their lives educationally. A couple of things that that your founding pastor's done, and you followed it up magnificently, is having school and preschools in the church as a church setting to set the foundation that God is first in your life across the board. And you have daycare, preschool, and you have school through your church.
That's right. That's right. You know, in 1976, the Wake Eden Community Baptist Church Nursery was founded. It was eventually renamed to be called the Wake Eden Christian Academy. 1 year later, the Bronx Baptist Daycare and Learning Center was founded. Both institutions were founded to provide a stable learning environment for children while their parents, many of whom were immigrants, were working during the day. And rather than just hiring a babysitter, the leadership of the church under Dr. Simpson felt that it would be better to actually have an academic setting for those children. And we're dealing with 2-year-olds and up, right, to the kindergarten. And so the churches founded this, and both of them had preschools functioning for many years, and still do. Well, at that time we would call it a daycare center functioning. And eventually, the facility at Wake Eden was expanded in the early 2000s, and then they added up to third grade at that point. And when I became lead pastor in 2013, I was installed as their second pastor at both congregations. Within a couple of years, we were able to move Wake Eden to have a full elementary school, and then an extensive aftercare enrichment program that includes a number of things that were also visions in the heart of our founder, Dr. Simpson. So, you know, our enrichment center offers, which we eventually incorporated that whole piece into our Wake Eden Community Enrichment Center. So, you know, it provides dance, private piano, martial arts, leadership development, which you came and taught. You taught leadership development at the school, and you also put us in touch with someone to teach etiquette. We teach our students etiquette. You also came and taught our chess club and basic finance. You even helped some of our students and their families learn how to go to, you know, select a bank, open bank accounts for the students from their very young. To this day, our children, they go to the bank and make deposits themselves, fill out the deposit slip, walk up to the teller, have a conversation with the teller. Even, you know, from our well, she's 10 years old now, but she's been doing that from she's probably 6, 7 years old. That's the youngest. You know, well, the previous youngest, our youngest, now 13 months.
Yeah.
You know, so, but all of that came out of those types of programs that we offer at the academy to our families, you know, and we have plans in the works to expand that and to do some things that will pivot it from just being an after school or school connected program to now really connecting it to the broader community beyond just the academic day.
I want to ask you a question about that, because this is, I know what it is because I've been a part of it. I've seen it. I know the inner workings and things like that. But help us to understand what happens to the disciples of the church as it relates to these extra activities. Are they involved in it? Do they step up? How are they sort of integrated into all of those things?
Interesting. So, between both organizations, we employ about 40 people between both churches. All right. So we have 40 employees, and a number of those employees are connected to the church or to some other ministry within the community. Um, there are some who are not connected to any churches at all. But in terms of how it affects the disciples of the church, meaning the membership of the church, so those core leaders, they are at the table when we are planning, when we are expanding, when we are making decisions. Nothing of major consequence is decided without me following these 3 steps: deacons and or trustees. That's one step. Officers, members. Deacons and or trustees, depending on what the situation calls for. Next, officers, and then the membership. That line of communication is the process that I take. And as the Lord gives the green light at each level, I know that this is his leading for this time in the ministry, right? Because for me, the church as a community matters, right? And their involvement and their buy-in and their affirmation matters. Even for my calling into ministry, I went into ministry because my church family told me that God is calling you into ministry. So it mattered to me, not just that I felt the call of God myself, which I did and have, but that my church said I was called. That was also important for me. So this was not just a decision. And so I don't customarily make decisions in isolation. As a pastor, it for me matters that there is a sense of buy-in from the larger church family that affirms it, because at that point, that you are moving together. You are in sync, and so sometimes you can speed up, other times you have to slow down because of where people may be at different times concerning a particular idea or visionary aspiration. Yeah, the members, for me, the membership, the disciples of the ministry, they are involved and they are integral to all that takes place there.
Have you noticed that there's a concern that they have towards the things that are taking place in the church, and so they come out for the meetings when they're asked to, so that they can become and be a part of those decisions?
Now, when you say if there's a concern, what do you mean a
Well, I
concern?
mean, like there's an interest that they
Oh
take
yeah,
interest in
absolutely.
those things, and then when there's a meeting called so that people can sort of voice their opinions or at least know what's going on, that they show up, and they show up in numbers that are reflective of the community that makes up the body of the church.
Absolutely. I have seen that. And, sometimes as you build trust over the years in different ways, less people may show up.
Right.
And it's not because
Trust
they're
your
not
opinion.
concerned.
Right.
It's not because they're not concerned. It's because they know, okay, I'm good with this.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Exactly.
so sometimes you may see that the numbers don't always reflect, a negative sentiment. If you don't see many, it could just very well be, no, I'm good with this. So yeah, just keep moving in this direction. And so I've seen both of those things happen. And sometimes what I've noticed is you may share ideas, but it takes a couple of years of repeating it, which I've done, before people begin to actually inquire, what is this again? I remember this coming up before. Tell us about this again. And so I share information, I try to at least, well in advance of taking the next step. And so, 2-3 years ahead, I'll put something out there and just keep repeating it and keep repeating it and keep repeating it at multiple meetings. And then eventually it comes to the point, okay, we're going to actually be voting on this at our next meeting. And I've been talking about it for about two years.
Now that's interesting, Frank,
Yeah.
because that speaks to being patient, not being, not trying to go forth and make everything happen right now.
Right.
Take your time, look at it, evaluate it, and then give people an opportunity for them to sort of get a grip on it. And then they say, okay, we're good with that. Or they come to me and say, we're not good with that. Help us out
And,
understand.
and I've had that as well, where
Mhm.
there was a step that I felt we needed to take, and they weren't good with it at the moment at that time, and there was concerns raised, and it stopped right there at the officers level.
Hmm.
That's where the concerns were. It stopped at the officers level, didn't push forward with it, left it right there. Right. And now, about maybe 5 years later, the same opportunity arose again. And now it was like green light level 1, green light level 2, brought it to the full membership, green light level 3, and so one of the things that I have learned through my reading of scripture is sometimes you have to move at the pace of the slowest one,
Yeah.
and it has to be people over tasks. The vision is the people. People are not accessories to your vision. People are not accessories to my vision. The people are the very purpose of the vision that God has given us. It's not just to build ministry for the sake of having more things. It's always connected to people, to lives, to families. And so it's really important that you bring people along in the process. And I think that there are examples of that in scripture, whether you deal with Joseph, dealing with his own journey of faith and loss, of being elevated and also imprisoned, or whether you're dealing with Moses, who was called to lead a people and then had to wander with them for 40 years because they didn't have enough faith to step into what God promised them. And so sometimes you have those moments where you have to wander a little bit with people until there is enough trust to recapture what God is saying. And Moses was challenged with that. They knew some of his history, and they were the immediate group that was liberated from enslavement, and they had some of the residue of 430 years
Hmm.
plus, of enslavement in Egypt. Now, not all those years were complete enslavement. There were years of prosperity in the beginning, but after Joseph died, a king rose who did not know Joseph and saw
Right.
these people as a threat. And so you're dealing with generations who suffered under that kind of oppressive life within society. And so when you're dealing with our people, we've come from a history of oppression ourselves, whether in the Caribbean on the colonialism or an enslavement, and or here in mainland United States,
Oh,
same
in
thing.
Africa,
Yeah,
apartheid.
yeah, so we've come from that journey, and the residue of that is in so much of our DNA, and the residue of that is in so much of our thinking, that we have to move as we deal with one another with the understanding of that, and how that affects us, and how that affects our um our priorities individually, and when we come together as a church family. So in the back of my mind, I'm aware of those realities, and I think it has helped inform my approach to leading God's people.
Hmm. And you've done a superb job, by the way. If I do have to say so myself. I've noted it. I've watched it. I've known you for a long time. I know, as I said, I knew Pastor Simpson, and I've just watched to see, how the ministry was going to unfold, and it has been consistently unfolding progressively and been a blessing. I mean, I guess one of the primary examples was just the other night, as I said, when we were in New Rochelle, and one of the younger members of the church received this scholarship from an organization that I'm a part of, that for the most part have no connection to the church. But it doesn't matter, because the connection comes through people. And that's what I like what you said. You said people over task. And if
Yes,
you love people, then people who are will always show up. People who are always needy and people who are able to give will always be there. And
that's
so it
right.
was just a wonderful, just a wonderful thing to have that kind of come together like that. And so, but it's a testament. It's a testament to your following the counsel of someone who set a beautiful example before you and showed you in their own walk of life how to do ministry that touches the lives of others, no matter where they are on the social spectrum.
Absolutely.
So I'm patting you on the back because
Okay.
that was you're really following, and you're just taking what was laid, the foundation that was laid, and taking it to the next level. And there'll be someone to come behind you, and prayerfully they'll take it to the
Absolutely.
next level and keep
Absolutely.
it going.
That's always the hope.
Exactly.
That's always
Exactly.
the hope.
It should not stop. Shouldn't stop at Sam Simpson. Should not stop at Frank Williams. It should not stop on whoever succeeds Frank and goes on. It should continue, and community should continue to be blessed because of the way in which the mentors are sharing their wisdom from one generation to the next.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Yeah.
I really mean that. I mean, it's just like amazing when you watch it. And I see, I see, because I work particularly and specifically, I work with churches, and I've seen so many dysfunctional institutions that it's scary. It's really scary because the question becomes, what happens to those people who are influenced by those situations?
Right.
What happens?
As you mentioned, dysfunctional institutions, I have to be transparent here. I don't want to give the impression as you speak that everything is peaches and cream all the time, or that we don't have dysfunction at either one of the congregations where I serve. But I'll tell you what I think um, is is of benefit. I One of the things I do is the church family knows that I am open to learning. I'm a learner. I tell my church this, I'm a learner. And I don't pretend to have all the knowledge.
Mm,
I create teams, think tanks, process. I'll throw an idea out, dismantle it. Um, you know, I am not one of those pastors that require obedience as a spiritual discipline.
mhm,
Like the pastor said it, so it came from directly from God. No, no, I don't take that approach, and I'm not sensitive like that, where my members can't say, Pastor, I don't like that idea, or why do you think that that should be how we, I respect their expertise, their areas of expertise. I respect their intellectual and spiritual wisdom. And even and I've said this to my leaders on occasion. Even if you say something that I fully disagree with, or you say something that I feel offended by, or I say something to you that you feel offended by, and we get mad at each other, know that we're going to overcome it. It's not a deal breaker. This doesn't end a relationship. That being family means that we can disagree and even get mad at each other, but we know that we're going to weather those feelings. And I've had that within the journey where feelings have been felt, and you weather those feelings. And I've been very intentional about addressing dysfunction.
mm,
I remember at one of the churches in particular, there were some things that I began to realize. I shut down all the ministries, through a voting process, of course, as I said, for the entire summer. And we began with having a guest come in and lead us in a session that dealt with uncovering dysfunction, and it was after, it was a session that involved all of the leadership of the church, and we listened and we learned and we heard from each other during that session. And after that, I myself and the associate, we preached the whole summer. That whole summer, up until from May until October, we preached on relationships. We preached on healing. We preached on rebuilding, on forgiveness, and so forth. And we had listening sessions where the members will come downstairs after church, and we did one a month. So we did one in June, July, August, one a month. And the members, and then we had our annual meeting in September. And then we ended it off with a prayer gathering in October. And so at these listening sessions, members were liberated to say what they felt, what offended you. And some brought up things from 20 years ago, even well before my service as lead pastor and so forth. And people talked, and people talked about how their personality has grown and have talked about their perceptions of other people. And there was just this honest, open dialogue that took place. And, I remember sharing with a pastor friend that I did that, and they said, what? They were shocked. They thought that it was such a risky thing to do because it can go left real easy. But maybe I didn't have the wisdom to know that it could go left. But I shouldn't say it that way, because it was intentional to have that. And you set the guidelines for that. And you are there and you're monitoring and you are listening. And as people say things, you then come behind their statements to really help them, because not everyone knows how to say the right words or the right phraseology. So sometimes you have to come and clean up certain statements after it's been said. And so you just do that, and you trust the Spirit of God through that process. And as long as you're bathed in that stuff in prayer and you're doing it systematically, so from workshop setting to preaching and teaching, through Sunday school, we had a full, everybody was in Sunday school as well. I didn't mention that part. Hearing the same thing for 3 months in Sunday school. The only ones who were out, not in Sunday school, were the very, very young, children. But everyone else, the older teens, everybody was all in adults, all in the same one Sunday school class. And one of myself or one of the associates will teach Sunday school and then preach a sermon and then listen in sessions and all of that. So what was all of that for? It was dealing with elements of dysfunction within the congregation. And it doesn't fix it all, but what it does is it sets the right kind of environment and the right kind of thinking and the right kind of processes. It elevates expectations in terms of how do we deal with stuff that we don't like within the community of faith. And yet churches can be notoriously dysfunctional.
Oh yeah. But
they can be notoriously dysfunctional.
And for good reason.
Yeah, right. Because we are coming from all walks of life, where many of us are coming out of pain. Many of us are found by God in the midst of a life that's going out of whack or spiraling in directions that are unhealthy. And so you bring all of that together in the same space, and yeah, something is about to blow.
Somebody stepped on your toe.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And you have to train people how to manage that. Christianity is not about how you handle things when the birds are singing or the sun is shining.
Right.
It's about how you handle the stuff you don't like.
Exactly.
It's about how you deal with instances and people. And I'm not dealing with the major stuff like something illegal or anything like that, but just the realities of everyday life with people. And so you have to help train the mindset and the heart to move and to think that way ahead of time. And that's what stuff like that is all about. And so, I do those kinds of trainings with the folks. We don't just learn the gifts of the Spirit. We learn, emotional intelligence. We learn leadership skills, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And I do try to model that as well for my leaders and the church family. So, I say all that simply to say, I don't want it to sound like we don't deal with dysfunction or not, but that we deal with it intentionally.
I am really glad that you brought that out, because a lot of times the conversation is that it's a dysfunctional place, and you leave it at that and you walk away from it, and it remains a dysfunctional place because nobody intentionally does anything to address the issue. So I'm glad that you said, and by the way, we're at the top of the hour, we're a little past that, but what I want to do is this. I'm going to go back. I'm going to share my screen again for a moment, and then what we'll do is I'm going to re-acknowledge our sponsors and advertisers and things like that. I'm going to go ghost for a second or two. You can do the same. not for a second, but I'll go ghost until we do the recognize our sponsors and advertisers and things like that. Then we'll come back and we'll finish out the show. And one of the things I want to talk about is Juneteenth.
Okay.
And because you had mentioned something about, about the diaspora, wherever we were, wherever we come from. And I think the Juneteenth should be a world celebration. And so let's talk about that when we come back, in addition to asking the question that we put on the table for everybody to consider. I've reworded it just a little bit, but it's in your chat box. I'm gonna pin it so that you can see it. What I ask is this: in what ways are you applying wise fatherly advice in the best way possible? So that's the question. So I want you who are viewing to begin answering those questions, because I want to bring your questions and your answers into our discussion so that you can become a part of the conversation. Is that fair? Good. So we'll be back in just a minute. Don't forget to support our advertisers and our sponsors, the JLR Company and J. Lauren Russell Consulting, LLC, for all of your church financial consulting needs. Check out our website, www.jlaurenrussell.consulting.com. That's www.jlaurenrussellconsulting.com. Or simply give us a call, 718-328-8096, 718-328-8096. If you want to train your trustees, if you want to develop your property, if you need a church loan, give us a call. We'll be there to help. Matters of Faith, the book, can be purchased at my Cash App, $Matters of Faith. The cost of the book is $22.80. That's $22.80. You can send your check or money order to the JLR Company, Post Office Box 301, New York, New York 10035. That's Post Office Box 301, New York, New York 10035. Get the book. It will absolutely bless your life. You can also get it as an ebook. All you need to do is go to www.smashwords.com/view/993177. That's www.smashwords.com/books/view/993177. The book has no shipping and handling if you get it as an ebook. And also check out the Eat Okra app for all Black-owned restaurants all over the nation. That's right, Eat Okra. And finally, subscribe, like, and share our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and share our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. And let me add just one more thing. Please subscribe to A Better Magazine, Better Mag Magazine. Please do. They're now carrying my column, by the way, so please you can support them in that way. But it's a wonderful magazine. They publish
Don't forget to support
quarterly. So please do that. www.abettermag.com. That's abettermag.com. Oops, let me go back. We don't want to miss this. I'd like to make you aware of, and then extend an invitation to you, to join me in a significant event that will take place in my life on Wednesday, July 12, 2023, at which time I will be installed as the District Governor for Rotary International, District 7230. The event will take place at the Pelham Bay Split Rock Golf Course, 870 Shore Road in the Bronx. The event goes from 6 to 9 p.m. The ticket price is $125. However, if you purchase two, it's $200. You can use the QR code on your screen, or you can use the link at www.rotary7230.org. That's www.rotary7230.org. I thank you for all the prayers that you've always offered to me, the support that you've given me, and I'm hoping that you can be there to support me as I take on this new responsibility. It is monumental, it is historical, and I'd love you to be a part of it. Wednesday, July 12th, 2023, Pelham Bay Split Rock Golf Course from 6 to 9 p.m. I will be installed as the District Governor for District 7230 of Rotary International. I'm going to do something just for a moment. I want to skip back up for a moment because I want you to see something, and I'm going to introduce Frank again, but I really want to share this with you because this was a pretty important event. Let's do this. On On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The nation was approaching its third year of a bloody civil war, and the proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforth shall be free. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in the rebellious states. However, the news did not arrive in Texas until June 19, 1865, 2.5 years later. That's when the slaves in Texas realized that they had been free for 2.5 years. We now celebrate Juneteenth as a national holiday, a Freedom Day, and I join you in celebrating with us as we look back over our years and look forward to our future. Blessed and happy National Freedom Day, Juneteenth. And now we're going to skip right down and just go ahead and catch up where we left off, and we're going to skip right on down. And I want to introduce you to, again, I've done all of that, did that. We're going to read the article and then we'll get started. And now the article, A Father's Wise Counsel. That article can be found in my column, Matters of Faith, at The Bronx Chronicle, www.thebronxchronicle.com, as well as the Yonkers Insider, www.yonkersinsider.blogspot.com. You can also find it in Better Mag Magazine, Black Westchester Magazine, and Pamela's Big Heart newsletter, A Father's Wise Counsel. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1, New King James Version. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. A father's wise counsel. Oops. Sorry about that, guys. I got to get this right. Something happened. We lost the sound, but I'll get right back to it, and we'll be right on target. Promises to them as if following the truth. Many people mistake a proverb for a promise. A proverb is defined as a saying that expresses a perceived truth that is based on common sense or experience. A proverb is not a promise as some contend. Some read the book of Proverbs and attach promises to them as if following the truth of common sense or experience will result in the supposed promise becoming a reality. The reality is this: a proverb is not a promise. When Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, he provided instruction particularly to his sons. Sometimes the conveyance of a proverb comes in the form of commands, and many of the proverbs Solomon shared were expressed in contrast. The text for this article uses that approach. A wise son making a glad father, but a foolish son bringing grief to his mother. Using the preposition or conjunction but shows the differences between a wise and a foolish son. Both receive wise counsel from their father. One uses it intelligently, the other thoughtlessly. In my own life experience, I had a father who imparted wise counsel to all three of his sons and his one daughter. To be completely transparent, none of us consistently took his sage counsel wisely. In fact, we were all guilty of foolishly squandering it. As we aged, if I can use the but conjunction here, I can safely say that each of us eventually did not bring grief to our mother, but gladness to our father. In other words, it took time for the wise and constructive counsel of our father to sink into the heads of his children. On this Father's Day and the eve of Juneteenth, the real day of liberation for enslaved Africans in America, I want to encourage the men, fathers, uncles, and father figures in our society to remain faithful, sharing wise counsel with their children and anyone who enters your circle of influence. Many former slaves shared wise counsel with their children, counsel that encouraged steadfastness in their quest for freedom. Many never saw that freedom, but their descendants have. Proverbs may not be promises, but if we share their wise counsel wide and far enough, their perceived truth and common sense approach to everyday circumstances just might change the trajectory of many wayward sons and daughters. Happy Fathers and Liberation Day. Here's the question again. In what ways are you putting the wise counsel of a father to the best possible use? Now I'm going to ask it one more time. Please engage me. In what ways are you putting the wise counsel of a father to the best possible use? Well, You heard him speak. You know who he is. I read his bio, so you know something about him. But his conversation and the information, as well as discussion, as you know, is riveting. Now, the picture that you see is him and his lovely wife, Tisha. So, Matters of Faith family, would you welcome with me tonight for the second half of our Matters of Faith broadcast, my friend and acquaintance, my colleague, and my associate. But I guess most of us just say friend, Reverend Frank I. Williams. All right, got you again, huh?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
So I'm gonna stop sharing now. Now let's go ahead and talk. So listen, I wanted to talk about Juneteenth. I've asked the question. I want people to engage the question. The question, of course, is, what is it that we're doing, literally, that we can do better, I guess, to really exemplify, personify the wise counsel that we have received over the years, because we have received it. Now the question is, how do we use it? So that's the question I'm asking to the audience. So I want you guys to respond. Please put your information in the chat box. That's very, very important. Put the information in the chat box. You see it there. In what ways are you putting the wise counsel of a father to the best possible use? Now, that doesn't have to be your biological father. Anyone that's there for you, that's sharing with you, giving you wise counsel. How can you put that wise counsel to the best possible use? Okay, that takes care of that. Now I'm back with Frank, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about this Juneteenth day that we're celebrating, and the fact is, this is interesting for me, because when I was growing up, I never heard of Juneteenth until I went to college.
Mm.
Never heard of it. Never knew what it was. Never knew the significance of it or anything else. But then when I went to college and I began to study, so we had to literally extend ourselves beyond the school system in order to find out any history about ourselves. Because as far as we were concerned, all we got was the jungle bunnies of Tarzan and all of that, the cowboys and Indians. That's it. That's all we really saw. We didn't really get in history. And of course, we got in our history classes, we were taught very, very little about Black history. And there are some states right now that are pushing to eliminate the teaching of Black history in their school systems, period.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and you know, history has a way of not going away.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
That's right.
history doesn't go away, and I think it's important to consider why those states that are looking to curb that kind of content or eliminate that kind of content, to really consider why. And human beings need to be honest with themselves, with their own heart, and to figure out, what is behind the reluctance or the resistance to fully understand the complex history of enslavement, injustice, and oppression that is the American story.
Mm.
And the nation will continue to deal with this history and the current modern day manifestations of that DNA, until it really decides to look at that honestly and allow generations to heal. We can all try to hide that content from children, but children will grow up and become adolescents and teenagers and young adults, and they'll discover that history, and they'll also discover that their parents and grandparents tried to hide this, and they will confront their parents and grandparents and say, why did you hide this from us? And those parents will then have a moment with their own children, about this. It doesn't go away. There's no getting around this, whether people want to see this as protecting a generation from guilt of some kind, or blame of some kind, ancestral blame of some kind, or whether they just see it as uh, an over um, an over um, I don't know what word to say here, but maybe an overuse of or illegitimate use of historical content at certain grade levels. But you know what, we're teaching so many other things to children within the context of schools that I think it's really going to tell on us in another 15 to 20 years, because our children will emerge from their educational system with a certain ideology about society. And that's really what is being formed here. And, so I think that we really better. So the other thing I want to say here, though, is, and you hinted at it, Rev, you can't just depend then on our educational institutions alone to provide knowledge and education about history, and in particular the history of Black people, people of color in this country, in this world. There has to be other sources where there is a process of education for that. Again, I say the churches ought to be a go-to institution for that. I grew up in my latter teen years and adulthood in a church context where I learned about Black history. I learned about movements. I learned about, and I had to give presentations in front of the church on these lives, on these stories, on these narratives. I had to read books for church, and prepare talks, especially during Black History Month. So that's, there has to be other places where we learn.
What's interesting is I was away this weekend. I went to Bermuda, and I was in meetings, and one gentleman who made a presentation, he's Bermudian and he was born and raised there. But this guy was amazing. I mean, he was eccentric but amazing. He's written 50 books on various aspects of the Black experience in Bermuda, from antiquity, or as long as he could, talking about every different area of life in Bermuda and how it's impacted the lives of people living there. And I said to him, I said, listen, can I get you to come on to my show and talk? He said, I don't do that anymore. So here was the point that he made to me. He was so frustrated because he's trying desperately to share this information that the Lord placed in his spirit, that he's now written in books, literally had 50 books that he's written. Imagine this. He published 50 books.
Yeah.
And people take it, he says, they take it too lightly. They're not paying attention to it. They don't know. And they don't want to hear what I have to say. And I'm saying, I want to hear what you have to say. And when he was making his presentation, they gave me 5 minutes to talk. And I mean, in 5 minutes, he was going. He said, I wrote a book about this. And he kept throwing them back into the bin that he carried with him. He kept throwing them back in there, talking about, I mean, amazing. And so what I say is that there are people who are trying desperately to get the word out so that it's not a United States problem. It's not a Bermudian problem. It's not a West Indian problem. It's not an African problem. It's a humanitarian problem. It's humanity. You know what? We have to own who we are. You said it. We have to own who we are, no matter how we dislike it. We are who we are. We have done what we've done. But the question is, what are we going to do going forward?
Right. And the wonderful thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ is it's a redemptive gospel.
Yep.
It's not a punitive gospel.
Yep.
It's redemptive, right? And so the Christian community, um, in my opinion, ought to lead the way, uh, especially when it comes to redemptive matters, grace related matters.
Mm.
Um, the life of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus really is the example for us, in how to um, heal the wounds of the past on the level of national wounds. On this level, this is not merely interpersonal, right? This is
Hmm.
this is an entire country that wronged a people,
Yep.
and history is littered with stories uh, that are perhaps just as tragic, but certainly this is at the top of the tragedies of history, the Black experience in this country. And so, if history has taught us anything, ignoring it never works.
Hmm.
Ignoring it never works. And so, we and the gospel doesn't call us to ignore sin or injustice. We have to acknowledge it. We have to call it what it is. Hence, that's what the word repentance is about. It
Right.
is the acknowledgement that this assessment of my conduct is accurate. And when you are able to say that, and this is a national dialogue, right, between races, um, it facilitates a process that begins for actual healing.
And I wrote something in the Facebook chat. I put redemption and grace equals every saint has a past, but every sinner has a future.
Yeah,
See, redemption means that everybody has to come from somewhere, but that doesn't matter because you have to come from someplace. Doesn't matter where you come from; it matters where you're going. And so, if we can embrace and listen, a lot of people, you talk to them, it doesn't have to be a black-white issue. It doesn't have to be a racial issue. But if you talk to people who have who have been confronted by their own sin, they will probably tell you something like, "My sin is so bad that I don't think God could ever forgive me for what I've done." And God can forgive anyone for anything that they've done, even the heinous things that have taken place under the guise of racism, white supremacy, or whatever else they want to call that thing. But it doesn't matter. What matters is, are you ready to repent? Are you willing to accept the redemptive grace that Christ offers?
it's important for us to not have a false perception of what God is able or not able to do.
Right.
And we ought to avoid speaking for God when it comes to that. The Bible speaks sufficiently enough for God, and what we see in Scripture is a God who actually does forgive sins, and who does use persons after they have sufficiently repented,
Mm-hmm.
persons who, knowing their past and history, we may not want to associate with, but the grace of God facilitates
Mm.
their redemption and facilitates them being a vessel that can be used in society. And where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. Um, God knows how to manage His system of
Mm.
grace, and I don't need to try and manage it for Him. I just need to be willing to be a conduit of
Right.
grace, because I don't own grace and I don't own mercy. God does, right? And but the challenge is He wants to facilitate that through me toward other people. And so I have to learn to submit my own um, ideas of what other people deserve outside of the legal system, right? That system is an established
Right.
system that
Right.
is there to operate the way it does. But in terms of my own personal feeling about what other people deserve, has to submit and yield to grace and mercy. And that's a journey. That's a
Yeah.
personal
Right.
journey, and I had to learn that. I particularly learned that through studying the life of Jonah.
Mm.
That's how I learned that. Jonah, I did a series on Jonah for Black History Month. I don't know if it was this year or last year, and I have a talk on Jonah and justice that I've taught, and Jonah is one of my favorite Old Testament prophets, particularly because of how he advocated for the victims of the Ninevites. In Jonah chapter 4, I know people remember Jonah as the prophet who ran away from God, and Jonah's more known for his disobedience and his reluctance to obey God and being swallowed by the great fish and all of that. None of that is why I remember Jonah. What I remember Jonah for is found in chapter 4 in his final plea with God, when he says, I knew you were going to forgive them. I knew that you are a God that's reluctant to do harm. What Jonah is saying, and when you really read about the Ninevites, the book of Nahum, which is, Nahum is 100 years, approximately 100 years after Jonah. But it gives you some more details about the kind of people that the Ninevites were. And it speaks about their city streets filled with blood, and their victims never, they're never without a victim. So they were a pretty wicked people. And Jonah is advocating for the victims of Nineveh in chapter 4. And he is saying to God, how could you forgive them? How could you? It's almost as if the grace of God was a travesty of injustice.
Yeah.
And so, I understood Jonah. And when you contextualize Jonah into the African-American experience, one may wonder, well, could God ever forgive a slaveholder? Could God ever forgive the oppressors who, when you begin to peel back the layers of Black history in this country, from enslavement to Emancipation Proclamation to Juneteenth, which occurred the same year as the 13th Amendment, which gave us equal rights, supposedly, and then Reconstruction came right after that. And then all of a sudden, Jim Crow emerges because there was a sense in some parts of the country that they could never be equal. Blacks should never be equal with whites. And so then this brutal system called Jim Crow developed, with then localized laws to embed that into their justice systems locally. And hence now a new form of oppression took place from the 1870s all the way up to the 1960s.
Or 2000s, because Mississippi just passed the law for lynching in 2013.
Well, the Emmett Till law was just signed into law too by Biden, right?
That's right, 2013, right?
We may not, and of course, if you want to get into Alexander's new Jim Crow, in terms of the criminal justice system that really just took off in the 1970s, right after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. All of a sudden now, this mass incarceration that began in the 70s, crack epidemic in the 80s, gang violence that just emerged in the black communities were not riveted with gang violence prior to the 70s and 80s.
Never.
No, we weren't. Those things were introduced into our communities after the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of the 1970s. Our communities have been set up in so many ways for dysfunction that sometimes you wish that you can have our brothers, our Black brothers, as you were talking about this man who wrote 50 books and he's trying to educate his people. If we can sit gang leaders down and say, brothers, do you really understand what has happened? Do you understand how gang violence was introduced and how guns were introduced from outside of our communities? How territorialism was actually intentionally integrated into Black communities so that we could fight against each other? If we would learn the history, you would hope that it could make a difference. So much of that history is unknown, to many in our communities. And so you're dealing now with well, how does God manage all of this? Yeah, I tell you, the cross of Jesus Christ is the most powerful event that occurred in human history. It was at the cross of Christ that, yes, slaveholders could be forgiven. Whoa, that kind of power of forgiveness is not a weakness. It is not a weakness. This is the most powerful event in history that allows a person to be reconciled to God and the opportunity to be reconciled to each other. And the church has missed that in this country for so many decades, over a century. The church is just now coming to terms with the power of reconciliation between the races. Just now coming to terms with that in real ways, in real ways. And the country is trying to press into that space as well, but it's challenging to do so if God is excluded from the equation.
Mm. Mm. You know, you mentioned a lot of stuff. I mean, it's great. This is great conversation. I love it. The most powerful event in human history, cross at Calvary, where the guilty can be forgiven.
Yeah.
Where reconciliation is possible. We miss it because we're not ready to forgive. And what do we pray every day? In the Lord's model prayer, forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who sin against us, or forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So with the same measure that we use to forgive others, that's the measuring rod tool that's going to be used against us when it comes to forgiveness as well. I mean, the interesting thing is that we don't benefit at all for the lack of forgiveness, because it can eat away at our very souls and our physical bodies. You know, a lot of people die because of the lack of forgiveness in their heart.
You know, and that feels unfair. You know, I have to always acknowledge that when I teach on certain subject matters, especially when someone has been victimized and they cannot forgive, you know, you can't blame the victim for
what happened to them, right?
what happened to them.
Exactly.
But also, you can't further blame them for not forgiving
That's
the
right.
victimizer.
That's right.
Right. But so you have to acknowledge the sensitivity of a real traumatic, painful experience and not add further guilt. So whenever I teach on certain subject matters, I don't want victims to leave feeling guilty because, oh, I don't have enough faith to forgive the person who victimized me. You got to be really careful with how we say that. You know, but you do want to lead victims toward liberation.
Right.
And a part of liberation is learning to forgive really painful experiences and traumatic experiences in life, right? And helping them to see that as a part of their process of healing as well, and an important process, and in many instances one of the first steps towards truly being liberated from the impact, especially the emotional and psychological impact of that which has traumatized them. And so when when we talk about that, I know earlier you said that the future matters more than the past, but sometimes in order to move forward, you do have to unpack the past. Absolutely. And deal with matters of the past, to effectively press into the future. And I find that the space of the church is such a wonderful place to do that. You know, it's your worship, it's your therapy, it's your, it's your stomping ground. It's the place where you learn your people skills. I preached on that the other day. Learning people skills in church, because you're dealing with all kinds of people. You know, it's your first boardroom. It's your first, it's your first audience. Whether you become a professional entertainer or you are a business owner of some kind, that the church facilitates so many of the skill sets that we need for success in the future. And it also gives us the life skills like the forgiveness and the redemptive thinking that we are talking about, that we also need to do relationships with people as well. The church, it's being a part of the local church, a healthy or a local church community that aspires to be healthy.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you I heard it read between the lines and not be retaliatory.
Yeah,
Learn how not to be retaliatory because of things that have been done against you, and even retaliatory against yourself. Because a lot of times, us being able to forgive ourselves for some of the things that we've done becomes virtually impossible for
yeah,
us. And
yeah.
we think so we become our own victimizers
Yes, we
because
can.
we don't think that we deserve forgiveness. So
Yeah.
we don't forgive
Mhm.
ourselves and we don't let anybody else forgive us either. So
Let me
we
tell you
keep
something.
stirring
Yes.
stuff up so that they keep
Wow.
throwing stuff at us. So
Real
we and
powerful.
that's and I think you're right. The church is the perfect place to learn those things. But you've got to learn likewise how to let go of some of the things that you've been holding on to for so long.
Yeah.
Because if those are the things that have not only kept you down, but they've held you back.
I
And you
call that,
gotta be able to
I like to call that self-oppression.
absolutely.
Self-oppression,
Yeah.
where the oppressed oppress themselves and oppress each other. And so you live in these circles of oppression. Whether you're oppressed to begin with, and then you oppress yourself and you oppress other oppressed people. And so the sin of oppression is perpetuated within the oppressed community, who is already experiencing, um, oppressive realities, some more than others, and that's our history, and there's so much to teach people, and I understand the frustration of this man that you spoke about. People don't take the time to avail themselves to learning, or even their children to learning this content. Many of us are running fast after our dreams and aspirations, uh, whether it be the American dream or some other dream. And there's some key lessons that perhaps we have missed along the way. But you try to get people, you try to get the information into people the best way you can. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like what you said when you talk about people running and they're spinning their wheels trying to get to success or what they deem to be successful. And oftentimes, the greatest success that you'll ever experience is learning how to forgive.
mm,
Because once you learn how to forgive, now you're really set free.
yeah,
The lack of forgiveness, and it's interesting, even if you're a victim, even if you've been victimized. I mean, one of the most vile kinds of victimization is brutalizing, particularly sexually, a child that can't defend themselves. That's the worst because they have to live with that for the rest of their life. It's hard, and sometimes you ruin their chances of having children for the rest of their lives, and all kinds of other things crop up. But not to forgive literally keeps you in that dark space.
it can, and it does for many people, and it's a the journey to be liberated from something like that is one that I cannot even venture
Mm.
to understand or to speak authoritatively about. The victims of such crimes, especially in childhood, uh, uh, can only, you know, I begin with sympathy, I begin with empathy, I begin with respect and listening. When persons carry such painful experiences, and certainly forgiveness will only serve to help them in their healing process. But I think that has to be arrived at over
Mm.
time, as opposed to preached into their.
Oh, you can't preach it into them.
Oh, you
Can't do it.
can't. That has to
Mm.
be acquired through a journey in life. I mean, that's really painful realities that many people live with in secret. And so it's there's a lot that we go through in life that I find um, at the end of the day, that the Bible gives us viable solutions to. But it takes a while for us to get there or to realize that God's way really is the better way. And God has such patience with all of
Mm.
us, such patience with all of us, that he gives us time to get to places where we can't get to without him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and so that's but there was something you mentioned earlier and that I mentioned earlier. And whenever I talk about the church and I make reference to, say, the Black church, um, and implicit in that is that there is a white church or other nationalities, and of course we
Mm-hmm.
have multi-ethnic congregations or multicultural congregations as well, which is a sign of progress. But when we talk about these issues of race and racism, oppression, and injustice, and we begin to talk about the role of the church in all of that, it's important to note for me that when we talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ as a liberating force, I want to acknowledge that there were, in terms of the church, there were persons who preached the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
There were persons who believed in Jesus, who had professions of faith in Jesus, that were complicit, that were advocates, and that were practitioners of the enslavement of Black people
Mm-hmm.
and the ongoing oppression of Black people, even after we were legally liberated by both the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th Amendments to our Constitution, that the church was a part of perpetuating oppression, the oppression of Blacks. And in that case, we would categorize that as the white church, many mainstream white congregations or denominations. And these were Christians, at least so professed. The way Frederick Douglass called it during his time, he called it the slave-holding religion or religious community versus Christianity proper. And it's important to acknowledge that, so that I don't speak of, or we don't speak about the church as this isolated community that basically has the right way, and if society would only just jump on board, everything will be all well. Well, no, the church has gotten it wrong, and in many instances has still gotten the issue of race and enslavement and oppression wrong. And even today, when we have these ideologies that have emerged of wokeism and speaking of the Black experience as if it's being exploited, as somehow the history of the Black experience is now being exploited to perpetuate a narrative that no longer exists, or that isn't as bad as some are making it out to sound, right? Those are some of the implications when you read between the lines, and churches are still there at the forefront of some of these conversations. And so it's important to acknowledge that when we speak about these things, that the church is not always on the right side of the history of these matters. Right. And so God is at work within his church as well, to help his church, those who profess faith in Jesus, to help them repent of their own sins and violations of the very gospel that we profess belief in as well. That the church is on her own journey and has been on her own journey from the foundation of this country as well, in terms of how she handles injustice. And the church that became the Black church is on her own journey as well, as we speak about forgiveness. and that same journey. So it's not just individuals, and it's not just society at large, but in terms of the subsets of society, the church herself is on a parallel journey as well, dealing with these same issues. When you talk about Juneteenth, when you talk about emancipation, when you talk about enslavement, oppression, injustice, the church is right there in the middle of that conversation, and not always as a liberating voice.
That's right. That's right.
Not always as a liberating voice, but for most of her history, she was an oppressive voice.
Right.
And then you had the other side of the church trying to liberate itself, and lift up a hermeneutic of liberation and a hermeneutic of reconciliation, all at the same time. I mean, the God is at work in the whole country, trying to help us move in a direction. But hopefully we learn. Hopefully we learn.
Well, I went to the Bible Museum down in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and I saw an interesting thing. I saw a slave Bible. Have you ever seen a slave Bible?
I have a slave Bible.
You do?
I have a copy of a slave Bible.
Okay. So it's about that thick. And anything in it, anything in the Bible that dealt with freedom, justice, equality was removed.
Right.
How many books are in the Bible? How many books are in there?
66.
So they just removed everything in the 66. So some books are down to a page, huh?
I haven't read through it, but I know that it's not the canon of scripture.
Oh no, it's literally, it looks like a pamphlet. It's like a pamphlet. Yeah. And that's what they gave the slaves. And you preach from that. Mm-hmm. And everything about liberation, everything about equality, the Joseph story about being enslaved and stuff, none of that stuff is included.
Right.
Because that was the way in which they maintained their position of slavery being condoned by God.
Right, and it was also supremacy, right? Once the ideology of supremacy took root, it didn't begin that way. It began as an economic thrust. It began as a convenience of identifying a group of people by virtue of their skin color who were easily identifiable and who one felt could be mistreated a certain way or harshly treated a certain way. But eventually, when the ideology of supremacy and inferiority got embedded, which really took root just before the Civil War, it took root in the early 1800s. Once that ideology took place, which actually began in the Caribbean, believe it or not, and then migrated to the States, that's when white supremacy was born, and the denominations added up. It added up, and so when liberation took place through the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th Amendments, it was no longer an economic thing. It was now a superiority thing.
Right.
And so supremacy emerged as the desirable status in society. And so Black independence and Black progression and Black education and Black elevation threatened that to become, for people to consider themselves equal with another who saw themselves as officially superior. That those ideologies and those superiority ideologies were enforced by debunked theories like eugenics and there were some others that emerged at that time as well that were basically biological in nature, biological inferiority.
Right. The Adolf Hitler, Aryan superiority.
That whole use of eugenics really drove it into ashes. So the church herself needed to be liberated from that ideology, and still does in many many parts of our country. That ideology, it has stuck and remains embedded in the DNA of people's thinking, and they need to be loosed from that.
Right. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I know that the ideology, and I could call it idiotology idiotology just permeates. And
Yeah.
it's interesting what it stirs up in people when they begin to bring that that kind of mentality to the surface. It's amazing what comes up, and it's amazing. What amazes me more is the people who would argue to maintain such a philosophy or theology.
You
Or
know, a first step to really corrective action on that is to ensure that we teach our children within the
correct.
context of our churches, be we monolithic in terms of being a Black church, or whether we are a multi-ethnic church where Black people attend. It's important to really help all people understand, don't accept inferiority to others.
Absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
we're all
Which
created.
leads us back to brings us kind of full circle, brings us back around to the, to the Wake Eden Christian Academy, which actually is a big part of making sure that our kids know who they are.
Absolutely. We teach Black history to all of our students there. They learn Black history. And,
Yeah. Well,
so
actually, they learn history, and
history,
history includes
Black history.
exactly because we are history.
Amen.
There is no history without Black people. So
Right.
that's
Right.
So by the way, listen, we're almost out of time. We got about 4 minutes left. So I need a little bit more than that, but so guys, we're going to be a little bit late closing out only because I want to make sure that I give Frank an opportunity to say whatever he wants to say and sort of give us out his parting words and give us sage advice from a loving father who wants to give us wise counsel.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show tonight. It was really, really great to be on here with you and to share some words with your listening or viewing audience. So thank you for that. As Reverend Lawrence said, there's been a long history of service to our community here in the Bronx between the churches that I serve, Bronx Baptist Church, that's near Fordham Road area, and the Wake Eden Community Baptist Church, that's up in the northeast section of the Bronx, and the Wake Eden Christian Academy, that's also there at our Northeast Bronx campus as well. So we are here to serve the people who God loves. And I invite you to come on out to services at either of the congregations. Wake Eden starts at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Bronx Baptist starts at 11:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And we love to have people come in. I talk about the Sunday morning worship time as learning. It's a learning opportunity. So we are in class as well. My parting words of wisdom, I preached this on yesterday from the book of Proverbs. Paul said these words to fathers. He says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition or nurturing of the Lord." And in Colossians chapter 3, he says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, lest they become discouraged." And when you look at all of these words, to embitter means to create resentment in the heart of children because one has been so hard on them that it no longer produced anything positive, but it produced discouragement and insecurity in the children. So my wise counsel is to teach your children, follow the example of King Solomon that as he wrote. And what's interesting in Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon wrote about his father. And I just want to read what Solomon said in chapter 4. He said, "Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. I give you sound learning, for I too was a son of my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me and said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commandments and you will live." Well, when you think about it, who was Solomon's father? David.
Yep.
Who was Solomon's mother? Bathsheba. David had an affair with Bathsheba, we know the story, and had her husband killed in war, right? So that whole situation was a mess to begin with. And here Solomon is speaking about his father David, giving him wise counsel. And all I can say when you read a story like that is, so we don't have to be the perfect parents. to
No.
impart wisdom to our children, because David certainly was not. But Solomon writes chapter 4 of Proverbs based on the counsel that he received from a father who made some really bad decisions in his life. And Solomon was still able to learn from that. And one of the big lessons that you learn from chapter 4 of Proverbs is to be teachable.
Mm-hmm.
Be teachable. Be willing to learn. And if anything I can say to you tonight, be a learner in your life. Be a learner. Be humble enough at whatever age and whatever stage of your life you find yourself. Be determined that you're going to learn. And you learn by being teachable. Whether you're a pastor or not, be teachable. Whether you're a leader in a church or not, be a learner. Whether you're a student or a business owner, be a learner and be teachable. And that begins by learning to listen to others and not dismiss people or treat them like accessories in life. And so that's all I will say. There's so much more that could be said, but I know we are over time. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Well, we just have you back. That's all. That's easy. I got to get you back. But this is it's been great. Thank you so much. So let me share with you what the Lord has placed on my heart, and then we'll close out that way. But, many people mistake a proverb, as I said in my article, for a promise. It makes sense to understand what a proverb is in order for us to understand what it is not. Proverb is not defined or is defined as a saying that expresses a perceived truth that is based on common sense or experience. Pastor Frank just shared with you from Proverbs chapter 4, wise counsel from a unwise father. It is not a promise as some contend. Some read the book of Proverbs and attach promises to the proverb as if following the proverb will somehow or another comes and attaches the promises to the proverb as if following the truth of common sense or experience will result in a supposed promise becoming a reality. The reality is this: a proverb is not a promise. A proverb is a wise saying that gives instruction that can lead to favorable conditions. Reverend Williams spoke passionately about the wise counsel he received from Pastor and his mentor Samuel G. Sampson in the 22 years that he sat at his feet and gleaned from the wisdom of his experiences. Now, if you notice, he didn't talk about the things that he said, but everything that he does exemplifies what he was taught. It should be noticed that Pastor Simpson is not Pastor Frank's biological father. You do not have to be a biological father, son, mother, or daughter to impart or receive seeds of wisdom in a person's life. Let me give you an example of what I mean. A local businessman shared a story about a night he spent on the prairie with a shepherd and his sheep. And during the night, he heard the long wails of coyotes. The shepherd's dogs growled and barked as they peered into the darkness. The sleeping sheep were awakened and began bleating fearfully because of the howling and barking. The shepherd calmly threw more logs on the fire, and the flames shot up. The businessman said that he looked and saw thousands of little lights everywhere, all over the place. What the businessman didn't know was that the sheep had received wise counsel from their shepherd. What all those little or thousands of little lights that were everywhere was the reflection of the fire in the sheep's eyes. Whenever the sheep were in danger, when fear was threatened or overwhelmed them, the sheep were not looking into the darkness. They were not focusing on the howling of the coyotes. They had received the wise counsel of their shepherd and set their eyes toward the shepherd. They turned their attention to the one who could help them. See, wise counsel refocuses your vision, gives you something different to look at. Here's a sound bit of wisdom from John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made, or has not been made. He who fears has not been made perfect in love. So if you're fearful, you've not made perfect in love. Now, that's sort of proverbial, but if you follow the lead, if you follow the advice, then you have nothing to fear. Keep your eyes focused on the one who can change. Proverbs may not be promises, but if we share their wise counsel wide and far enough, their perceived truths and common sense approach to everyday circumstances just might change the trajectory of many wayward sons and daughters. And we've got some wayward sons and daughters in our midst. Happy Father's and Liberation Day. My guest tonight, Reverend Frank I. Williams, is a friend who I love, and there's absolutely nothing he can do about it. He really is the epitome of someone who has taken the wise counsel of a caring father and has put it to the greatest possible good. He is transforming lives from the old to the young and everywhere in between. He has prepared himself academically. He has allowed the Lord to use him to provide wise counsel to others, and he does it every day of his life. If you are recipients and don't share what you know, have you really learned anything? Thank you, Pastor Frank, for being a living example of someone who has benefited and is sharing wise counsel. I have thoroughly enjoyed your visit with us tonight on the Matters of Faith family. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to bless this branch of Zion tonight. We don't take it lightly, and I'm certain the Lord will reward you. Now, let's make sure that this is not the last time that you bless us. What I affectionately call the Matters of Faith family. So you got to come back and do this again. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely is that. Thank you for having me.
Good. You know, I got to get you back, man, because this is too good to let go. You know, we need to do it more frequently, and maybe we'll bring somebody. No, I think I'll just stay with you. We'll just talk. I like this conversation. This is good. Okay. Now, don't forget our advertisers and sponsors, the JLR Company, J. Lauren R. Consulting, LLC, for all your church financial needs. Telephone number is clear, 718-328-8096, or visit our website, www.jlaurenrussellconsulting.com. It's not about the castle. It's all about the kingdom. Matters of Faith, the book. You know, I've been talking about it all night long. I always talk about it, but you know it. You've seen it. Let me show it to you. This is the book, and you can get it at my Cash App. Just send $24.30. I know I said something different, but postal costs just keep going up. $24.30 covers shipping and handling. All you got to do is to go to my Cash App, $ Matters of Faith. Or you can get the ebook. An ebook has no shipping and no handling. www.smashwords.com/books/view/993-177. Now you have that information in the chat in Facebook. Please, ma'am, please, sir, make sure that you do that. Avail yourself. You'll be blessed by it, and you'll be glad that you did. Give it as a gift to someone for their birthday, for the holidays, whatever it is. Give it to them for Juneteenth and say, liberate yourself. Now, please subscribe to Better Mag Magazine. Make sure you do that. www.abettermag.com, abettermag.com. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. Now listen, telephone, text, email, message, any way you do it, but tell a friend to join us next week on Matters of Faith, the radio show, every Monday night. I can't tell you what the topic will be. I can't even tell you who my guest might be, but I can tell you this. You don't want to miss it. We will be live on Matters of Faith and the J. Lauren Russell Facebook groups. Now, here's the thing. We will drop the episode on our Matters of Faith YouTube channel. We do that every week. So please subscribe, like, and share the Matters of Faith YouTube channel. Now, the Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Now, if no one told you this today, let me be the first to say that I love you, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. So get used to it. God bless you all. You know that I truly do love you. I don't say it in jest. Good night and God bless. We'll see you all next week, same time and at the same station. God bless and good night, everybody. And thank you again, Frank. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, Lauren.
Have a good night.
Thank
Tell
you.
the wife I said hello, and all,
will,
including Thomas. I'll see him.
Robert. I'm going to tell her you said Robert. I don't know where
right.
Anyway. All right, brother. Take care, man.
Okay, good enough.
Bye-bye.